So this is the Kitsap Sons Editorial Board. Like I said, we're talking to the candidates for the 26th District House, Position 2. And Larry, why don't you take the first stab, introduce yourself, 2 minutes, and then Michelle, you'll have 2 minutes, and then we'll go into some Q&A.
Great. So I'm Larry Seaquist. I live down in Gig Harbor with my wife Carla, who's a brilliant writer. The two things that have got me especially fired up about this year's campaign, and I'll explain why. One is education, end to end. And while everybody, and I'm sure that you wish to talk about education and McCleary funding, the fundamental problem is not the money, it's the politics in Olympia of getting too many requirements on the schools, not paying attention to priorities. And so much of what I've been focused on is to try to sort through all that with an intelligent approach to how we're going to go tackle these important problems. It's very important to remember that our 25-year-olds are 10% less educated than their parents. So anything you want to remember is that we're a high-tech, high-skills, high-export state. And if we do not turn that around very rapidly, we are going to fade out of global competition. Second problem that I'm really working on is the broken politics in the state. Where, as you saw, voting was extremely low. That's happening in part because the organized parties are deliberately making the voters angry in order to drive the votes down. I'm out in my campaign, as you'll see, trying to re-engage voters with what the real issues are and give them a sense of actual participation. My background in one sentence is I started life as the oldest of 5 kids in an extremely poor farm family. We knew that if you got an education and worked hard, you could get ahead in life. And I did that, ended up enlisting in the Navy, enjoying a career in the Navy, and then after my Navy time spent 10 years working around the world in conflict situations and war zones where I could see what happened to a country when it didn't take care of itself.
Thank you. Michelle.
My name is Michelle Caldier. I'm running for state representative. I want to tell you thank you so much for letting me be here. This is my first time ever running for office. I am a dentist, I do nursing home care, and I got involved because last year there were these horrible bills that would have had somebody with about a year of training to do surgery on the poor, which included my nursing home folks. And I went down to Olympia, I helped defeat those bills, and it really inspired me to run for office. One of the other things I found was that there's certain professions that are very well represented in Olympia. There's a lot of policy analysts, political science folks, but there's really not that many people from the community. And with the background that I have, there's really nobody who has ever worked in elder care in legislature. There's, I was in foster care as a child and later became a foster parent. I will have there's nobody who's ever been in foster care who's in the legislature. There's nobody who's worked with Medicaid and also with, as a private practitioner like I have. In addition, I'm also an affiliate professor over at the University of Washington. And the students that I have, from when they started their education to where they are now, their college tuition has more than doubled while they've been in school. And I graduated with about $144,000 of student loan debt. I was a single mother. It was very scary for me. I was lucky that I was able to pay that off. And I'm very concerned about some of the students today and to be able to afford college. Right now, my youngest daughter's getting ready for college herself. She turns 18 in December, and it's almost $100,000 for her to go to the University of Washington. I think that that's not something that most families can afford. I think that with my background, with my expertise, I think I could bring a lot to the legislature and to help and serve the people of my hometown.
Okay. The one thing neither of you mentioned, but it's definitely an issue in the district, is transportation, and this is something that we're obviously asking every candidate of because it's going to be a big thing in the session to come. I want to know, there have been, Larry, because you were down there last last time. There are different ideas on how we put together some kind of package to try to fund transportation projects. The ferries is the one that's also very important to Kitsap County and how that fits in there. So tell me what your outlook is on how we pay for the transportation needs in this state, how you set your priorities for what you want to see happen there, and what is it about you, because it's going to take some negotiation and some decisions on meeting with the other party. What do you bring to that issue? We'll start with Michelle on this.
Okay. So I am a commuter. I go to different nursing homes from Pierce all the way up to Skagit Valley. And I have just kind of seen things from a community member's perspective. I take the ferry to work for many times, and also I'm on the bridges, as well as I was on the Skagit Valley Bridge an hour before it collapsed. And I think that we have a lot of transportation problems in our state. My fear is that with the funds that are there, that there's so many problems that we have, that if we just added more money to it and we don't fix the problems that are currently there, that we're not going to get anything accomplished. And for example, with the ferry system, okay, there's a lot of problems. It's cost us a lot of money. 2 years ago, there was someone who blew up the Walla Walla engine. Engine at Walla Walla cost us taxpayers $3 million. The accountability for that is that they had a letter of reprimand. Same thing with the people who had drilled a hole the wrong way in the ferry. You know, if I drill the wrong way in a tooth, I lose my job. I get my license taken away. I get very, you know, from private perspective, it's a serious issue. Unfortunately, the way that we have with the ferry system is that a lot of the workers, there's very little accountability. So what I did was I sat down and I talked with some of the managers for the ferry system, and I said, listen, from a taxpayer's perspective, why on earth would we want to put more money into the ferry system when there's all these problems that are going on? You know, we need to fix these problems first. In addition, I also sat down and I spoke with some of the ferry workers. And what the ferry managers told me is that they have, you know, these are unionized workers, and that there's a couple people that they have very little flexibility to discipline them. In addition, the ferry workers say, you know, because a lot of them are very, you know, I think that the average ferry worker is very good, and they say that with the press and with the media and everything, that it makes them look like they're not doing their job properly. And one of the things I would like to do is sit down with the unions and renegotiate and say, listen, if we have certain employees who are putting forward, you know, making egregious mistakes, $3 million taxpayer mistakes, you know, there should be some way so that we can allow the managers to manage properly. One of the things that I do well, at least with the healthcare industry, is being able to get a large group of people together and work collaboratively with everyone, saying, you know, hey, what's the goal? The goal is that our tax dollars should be utilized as efficiently as possible. We can all admit and be honest and say, listen, there's a lot of problems that we have.
Have you negotiated with unions in your career?
I've never negotiated with that, no.
When you say they don't need to put money in, you would not want to put any money into the ferry system until you see certain reforms?
Exactly.
What are those? Obviously, you said the one is being able to fire people.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be a proper accountability for the workers. In addition, there's the way that the transportation dollars are, is that in King County, you will have the same employee doing King County work, and they get considerably more money. I think that there needs to be a level playing field for that. I think that we need to renegotiate and say, listen, you know, that all the workers should be paid similar, whether they're from King County or whether they're from Kitsap County, and to have reforms in that area as well.
Okay.
So let's go back to the big problem first and then come to the ferry second, if you like. As you know, I was one of the swing votes because I'm a swing voter in a swing district. When we get to things like tax votes, it's me and one or two other people who decide whether that bill moves forward. So it was I who made the decision, along with two other people, that we would vote for the 10.5 cent tax increase. We did that for 3 reasons. One was the port, need to make sure that the Port of Tacoma has access through 167. And the biggest reason was the ferry system. If we do not immediately fund the ferry system, our ferry system is going to collapse. It's on the edge of collapse right now on both ends. Both the machinery, the ships, the boats are running at the ragged edge of their ability to operate. We've got casualties all the time. And the crews themselves are too small, undertrained, too few people, they haven't staffed up. So both of ends of our ferry system, human and material, are on the edge of collapse. So I'm ready not only to vote for the 10.5 cents, each penny of gas tax gets you about $1 billion. The total bill, which both the big labor, the unions, everybody agrees in the state, everybody knows that it's about $30 billion worth of work that we need to do in our state. The idea was to go around 10, 11, 12, 10.5, 11, something like that. And so we should see next time a proposal. And as long as that includes the reforms that go with it, I insist that we get to that point because we've got to fund the ferries and that there be real reforms with it. The reforms I'm after are 2. One is that we will roll back and cap the bridge tolls at $4. As you remember, the bridge is the only tolling project in the state in which the users pay 100% of the cost. We're now crossing the place where the cost of going across the bridge is damaging to the economy and citizens. So my proposal is that if we do the gas tax, we roll back and cap it $4 and let this additional money take care of that. I would like to see all candidates, both parties, all races agree to do that. The second thing we know, and you guys have been kind of to publish this regularly, is we've got to see a fundamental, immediate reform in the leadership of the ferry system. Representative Norma Smith and I want the leadership fired, like this afternoon. I was on the phone again yesterday with Kim Gilmore, the number 2, and they're telling me, Lynn Peterson, as of Thursday, said, Larry, we hear you. The governor has issued instructions for a get well plan. Lynn Peterson has issued instructions to resolve the reliability problem. I'm in the trust but verify stage, and so are my fellow legislators. We're not going to get any place with this ferry system until the leadership is brand new. Specific thing we've asked the governor to do is not appoint the new director until they've got a punch list. They've got a list of things that need to get fixed so that when they make the appointment, the new person, woman or man, whoever that turns out to be, everybody knows what he or she is going to go do to fix the system.
Do you feel? Go ahead, sorry.
That's my position is I'm ready to vote for that tax increase, gas tax increase immediately. If we do not do that, we basically condemn our ferry system to die very quickly.
Last year with the gas tax and that package that was built, there are some reforms to the system that Republicans are also asking for that Democrats wouldn't go along with.
Now,
what of those are you willing to go along?
All of the above. I was out in Yakima a couple of days ago talking to Curtis King, the Senate Republican chair of transportation. Curtis and I agreed last session on, this is Republican and Democrat, 2 houses agreeing that we needed to fundamentally reform the way in which we design and build boats. So he tabled this idea. I wrote the bill in the House, got a ferry system in Washita to agree to with an amendment on the floor, and we passed it. So not only have I sponsored it, we've passed the bill back to the Senate. Then it got complicated in there. So I've got, David, a long list of reforms from the way investigations are done, to what the mission of the ferry system is, to the way the fares are set. End to end, I've been writing over and over that set of reforms.
When you say the leadership has to be fired, how deep does that go?
3 or 4 people. The senior guy himself has gone to, but I mean, everybody knows these names. but the acting director, there are about 3 people who have been there forever, and we know that that whole leadership team needs to go. And we need to downsize the whole damn thing. There used to be 30 or 40 people in headquarters to run what is not a huge system. Now there are more than 400. We're not even sure what their names are. They hire their friends, they retire on Friday and show back up on the desk on Monday, they hire their kids. The place needs to be cleaned out.
You mentioned the 3 reasons that you supported the tax increase. You supported the Tacoma and the ferry. What was the third one?
The transit. Well, for me, there's the bridge. Okay. Yeah. So before they get my vote for that, what the Republicans will probably propose is about 11.5 cents without the CRC, without the Columbia River crossing in Vancouver. What I'm suggesting all of us over here ask for is that rollback and cap, fully funded ferry operations. We did get the vote to begin to fund ferry construction as long as we overhaul the way that's done.
What's your opinion on the potential for a gas tax?
Okay, so the way that I kind of look at it is, Mr. Seaquist has been on he's been in legislature for almost 10 years. There's been a lot of problems going on, not just this year, not last year, but it's been going on for a long period of time. And so there's been ample opportunity for there to be changes, and yet it continually gets worse. And one of the things is that when it comes to the gas tax, we were in a forum with Lynn Peterson, and she said that of the priorities of the revenue for transportation dollars, and if the gas tax were going to be passed, this is how she would prioritize things. Number 1, she would fix the existing roads to prevent future problems. Number 2, she would finish the existing projects. And number 3 would be to prioritize the remaining projects based off of safety, not rolling back the tolls for the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. That was not a priority, and I even asked her that, and that's not where the money is going to go. And the thing is that I think instead of, coming up with all these great ideas that never amount to anything because we're running for office, I think instead what we need to do is we need to really look and say, okay, well, what is going to happen if that gas tax was passed? I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. You have 147 legislators down there, and they all want a piece of that gas tax. How much, honestly, is going to come to our district? I mean, really honestly, is going to come to our district when we have all these other problems. You have all those other people who want a piece of that pie. I personally think that gas tax, the 10.5 cents, I think it would be better spent in our pockets, and then we would only tax at the last resort. And what we need to do first is we need to really look and say, of this money, can we do things more efficiently? And when it comes to, my opponent talked about Representative Norma Smith and working with her, and I'm very proud to say that I'm the only candidate that she's endorsed. And I'm excited to work with her next year for many years to come. And the thing is I think I can, be a huge asset to the legislature and really look at the dollars that we have. Is it spent wisely? And before we ever add any more dollars, we need to figure out what is going on with the ferry system. And I really believe it's not just 1 or 2 people. I think that there's a whole team. I look at when everyone tried to go to Seahawks game, okay? And they thought that it had a capacity of 1,600, and so they added, 1,687 people on the boat, when in reality it only had a capacity of 1,200. That wasn't one person who did that. That was a team of people. There is a team of mistakes, and it doesn't just start there, and it doesn't end there.
How do you get to that as a legislator?
How do I get to that?
What I hear you saying, I hope I'm correct, is you're saying I would not support putting money into this until I see reforms.
Right.
Other than, you mentioned the one earlier, if someone makes a mistake, they discipline or fire.
Yeah.
But when you say we need to take a look into the ferry system, what does that mean? What does that look like to you? What would earn your trust, earn your confidence?
It would earn my trust.
These have changed, and here's what I would do to help them.
So one of the things I did with, I'll back up, one of the things I did with dentistry, so I was the chair of the Access to Care Committee, and we had a problem where people were seeking dental care in hospitals. And the problem is that, they don't get their tooth pulled, they get antibiotics and they leave. And instead it costs us taxpayers $500 every time they come. And so one of the things I did as the chair of the Access to Care Committee is I sat down, we created a separate task force. We had, people from the hospitals, we had people from, there's a community program that teaches people how to, how to show up for their appointment and how important that their appointment is, and also other community health clinic workers. And we had a huge team of about 15 people, of experts in the field, that came together, and we said, okay, so what's the problem and what is it that we can do together to make things happen? I think that's what needs to happen with the ferry system as well. We need to get the union together and sit down. We need to be very honest, and also get ferry workers. We need to get some of the management together, and we need to be honest and say, hey, listen, there's a huge problem, and until you guys come up with something to say, hey, this is what the problems are, this is what we're actively doing to fix them, I don't think that we should approve any additional money.
Do you agree, earlier you mentioned the 3 priorities you heard from Lynn Peterson during that
Yes.
meeting. Do you agree with any of those, or do you disagree with them?
No, if I had her job, that's exactly what I would do. I mean, she is in charge of the transportation for Washington State. I would love to have her say, my number 1 priority is the 26th district. And all of my, when the gas tax gets approved, then I'm gonna, make things more affordable for people to go across the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. I would love for her to say that. I would love for her to say that she's going to put a whole bunch of money into the ferry system. But if I had her job, and I was looking at all of the problems that we have in our state, that's how I would prioritize things. And I think that, I agree with where she comes from. I mean,
But you do not agree with a gas, you would not agree with a transportation bill to fund things that included a gas tax?
okay. So
The
I'm
way you
sorry.
understand it, right? The way you understand what
so
she's
right-
thinking, you would not vote for
I
it.
would not vote for that, no.
Okay.
And I think that the people of our district have also made it very clear that they do not want additional taxes.
Okay.
Can I go back to, it's the legislature that decides where the money goes, by the way. To your question about how would you respond to what a legislator can do to respond to the overcounting problem. So here's what happened in real life. When we heard about that afternoon, called George Capacci, and it was clearly the masters were upset. The masters of most of the boats, and many of us, including a bipartisan group of Drew McEwen, me, Christine Rolfes, we all know that they've got a counting problem. We have been worried about counting and safety. So as soon as Capacci said, and sent me an email about what he was going to do, I sent an email to Cam Gilmore and said, you've got to charter a formal investigation. You don't just send somebody over to Bremerton and say, well, what happened? Beyond that first, this person did or did not reset her clicker, which was the core problem, probably, is immediately you've gone into the whole system. Is it equipping its agents correctly? Does it have, what are the standard procedures? How did that whole set of procedures work across the system? And then what are the safety equipment? You immediately have opened up 2 very important lines of investigation, and you need a formal investigation. So that's what Lynn Peterson comes back to me and said, well, we agree with you. When I called yesterday to find out, are they acting on that? The answer is not yet. They're still doing this informally. So I'm still pissed that they are not following up on the safety issues that were opened up here.
How do you answer it? Michelle earlier mentioned when the mistakes were made on the Walla Walla, I forget which boat it was, the hole was drilled in. When those things had happened in the past, do you feel the same way? Why is it that that's not been addressed through the unions?
Because we've got it, it's not a union problem. It's a culture problem in the ferry system headquarters. that it's an old boys network of, hey, if something happened, hey, George, would you go check that out? What I have been writing bills to try to do over and over, I think I'm making progress, is to impose upon them a new formal investigation procedure. Talked about the Skagit River Bridge. That was carefully investigated in public. And we recently had a formal report about what happened, in detail. None of that ever happens in the ferry system. So the current one that I'm after them on is the Tacoma. Massive casualty. I went down to the boat the day after they towed it into Eagle Harbor and went down and looked at the switchboards. And, with the engineers who were there trying to figure out what happened. So it's hugely expensive casualty, and it's hugely expensive in time. We're going to be missing that boat through the rest of the year at least, apparently. They still will not answer. This is the point that Norma Smith and I made to the governor, is that they continue to misrepresent or to hide their information. That's what we're trying to do, is get the leadership changed so that we've got leadership that actually is responsive to the public and to the legislature.
Why do you think they're so hesitant to do that?
It's a long-time cultural problem. You remember when you'd need a kind of a legislative or an organizational psychologist. You go back to the 50s, as you remember, the ferry system was assembled out of the modern versions of the Mosquito fleet. Only the Black Ball line in Port Angeles to Victoria is the only private operation, so to speak. So it was glued together, and it reported independently to the Transportation Commission. It was an independent organization. It's not been that many years since it was attached to the WashDOT, and it's only been recently that WashDOT was actually formally attached to the governor. It's only been 2 years since WashDOT and the ferry system's budget is inside the legislative budget system. It was always handled as a separate computer program, right? So along the way, these folks gradually, it became a sick organization with some people in there who were basically taking care of themselves.
If you're in Olympia next year, how do you deal with a sick organization?
Well,
What are your
I have a different opinion, and that is because I sat down with some of the ferry management and I asked them, and they said that with the unions, there's something called a progressive disciplinary system, and if that is their first offense, whether they blow up the Walla Walla Bridge, blow up the Walla Walla Ferry motor, and it costs us taxpayers $3 million. All the problems with the design errors for 520 Bridge, it's cost us over $200 million. It's a progressive disciplinary system, and this is how they are only able to discipline their union workers. And I think it has less to do with psychology, and I think it has more to do with the fact that this was negotiated with the unions.
And I couldn't disagree more. It's not a crew problem. It's not, yes, the unions are difficult to deal with, but they've been living in a very hostile work climate. Those are I know sailors, and these are very good sailors. The terminal ticket takers, that's not our problem. It's not the crews, it's not the personnel or the bargain relationship. It's a sick headquarters that has been mishandling the whole system.
Do you have any more questions about the ferries?
I'm just, I'm trying to figure out how, I'm
You
forming.
have 100 questions.
I have 100 questions, but I'm trying to figure out which ones, having dealt with unions for years and years and years on both sides, being the president of one and having to deal with them from a management perspective, I think, well, I'm not gonna give my opinion, but do you, either one of you really think the union is the issue, or is the union not the issue, or is it management? Which one is the more powerful issue there? That would be the question I would ask.
Easy, it's management. The unions, we do need to go in and do some reforms. There are 14 bargaining units there. There are some bizarre arrangements. The terminal supervisors, for example, is a little scam. in which the terminal supervisors negotiated a 4-day work week. Now you ask yourself, we only got 7 days a week, how does that work? Means both groups work on Wednesdays. Okay? And they manipulate their budgets so that they pay themselves very well. That the leadership of that group is one of those who we need to completely overhaul that. But I think if we provide fresh managerial climate, you will find those unions enthusiastic about the other kinds of work rules to be cleaned up.
And I think it's both. I think it's both the management as well as the unions. And I think that they are not working hand in hand. And I think that they need to, that's part of the problem. And at least from sitting down and talking with both the workers and also with the managers, that was the conclusion that I came up with. And I think it's both. I think just to point your finger at the 20 people in management, I don't know how many people that Mr. Seaquist is wanting to fire, that's managers. But I find it hard to believe that it's just those people. This is a systemic problem that's been happening with every single one of those ferries. And I think that they need to be honest with each other and say, hey, what is it that we can do in order to fix the solution? What exactly is the problem? How can we fix it?
Okay, let's change subject to
Sure.
education, because that's an important one too, to talk about. There has been money that's gone into trying to meet what McCleary set out and has told the legislature must happen. But there's going to be a lot more money that needs to go in there in the session coming up. What's your philosophy on how that's done, including what things need to be given up to make sure that the legislature does stick to the plan that's been set out by the courts? We'll start with Larry.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with the court's decision, and the decision itself is well worth reading. It's exceedingly well written. So, David, I would say there are two. I would approach this on two tracks. One on the money side, but more important than the money is a fundamental, refreshment of the way the legislature deals with the K-12 system. We must come up with something in order, just in the next budget, of $2 or $2.5 billion towards the 2018, which is about $4.5 billion ahead of where we are now. Growth, while the economy is doing well right now, growth in the budget, that is, will not do much for that. We are going to have fundamental tax reform. We have got a tax system. We don't need to, I do not believe, in fact, I've got a button in the car about no income tax. I'm not proposing an income tax. What I'm proposing is that our sales tax and BO taxes be reformed in a comprehensive way that plays fairer with our businesses, fairer with our individuals. It actually generates more revenue. We'll need to do something like that. You are not going to be able to fund that $2.5 billion in the next budget alone just out of petty cash.
Can you explain what you mean? Because that's a really nice thing to say, but help us understand what.
Okay, so the B&O tax, we know that the B&O tax is fundamentally damaging to our businesses, particularly the smaller end. So I would raise the floor on B&O tax to $250,000. So that if you were grossing under that as a small business, you would do fine. We will get more sales tax, more economic activity that way. And I would go in and fundamentally overhaul the way in which we do sales tax so that we're not penalizing the poor here. It is the poor people in the state who are paying all of that tax.
So you move sales tax to certain
You clearly
types
have,
of goods
but you've got
instead
to
of
do it
others.
on a comprehensive basis. I'm not talking the usual Democrat thing to say. My folks in my party on the left side that I don't agree with, they would like to close a loophole or two. They'll find you a favorite loophole. That is not only politically impractical, never generates the kind of revenue that we really need. We're talking about serious money.
How does the and I realize we're very simplistic about this. If you raise the amount of revenue needed to pay the B&O tax, what fills in that gap? Because there's a certain percentage that's lost, and small businesses aren't paying it, I get that.
Our staff estimates are increased economic activity from that would more than generate net increase. So let me be more specific. I chair the higher ed committee. I've had working through the summer a group of legislators and staff. How are we going to, at the same time that we need to do the McCleary K-12, I need $1 billion or $1.5 billion over the next 3 or 4 years for higher ed in order to increase the throughput, increase quality, and drive down the cost of going to college, way down. So we're looking at a set of revenue ideas about how we could increase the revenue available, the resources available to the universities, looking at a radical set of reforms and efficiency. We are going to have to make our university system much more efficient, like around a third, 30%. And, just so that we are processing students, faculty. I'm not talking about cutting teachers, I'm talking about making the system work more efficiently.
So that's essentially your philosophy on higher ed is that money needs to be found within the system.
Now, we
Saying that
need to
correctly?
add money. We need to also do these creative things like pay it forward, where we change the way in which student debt is incurred. And we've got to see the universities be about 1/3 more efficient.
Okay. We'll come back to, because I know you wanted to talk about actual, not money, but let's let you answer the funding question first. If you need to start finding extra revenue to put into education, where does that come from?
First, I want to say something that my opponent just said, how he was going to help fund education by raising the floor for B&O taxes. So basically what that means is that people who are currently paying taxes, that they would not be paying taxes, and then also make it so that our poor are not paying sales tax. So we would actually lose tax revenue from that. I mean, basically we're losing money, because right now we currently have sales tax from the poor, and we also currently have B&O taxes from companies that are making, less than $250,000 a year. So I just find that quite interesting that that would be the plan, because it doesn't make any sense.
What's your plan?
So my plan would be to, basically we need to create a separate budget for education, and we need to fund that. I mean, that's our priority. I know a lot of people say, okay, well then where's the money come from, right? And I personally think that there's a lot of money that's out there and it's not well spent. And I'm gonna give you a perfect example of this. One, obviously my area of expertise is more dentistry and healthcare. One of the things that we do when someone goes into a community health clinic, okay, is that they have separate funding. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but every single time someone shows up at a community health clinic, not only have we paid for the building to be built, we've also paid for other things, but every single time they show up, it's between $270,000 to $330,000. Sorry, $270 to $330 each and every time. And what they were finding was that the community health clinics were having families come back. I temped at one community health clinic, and I had a lady who came in from, she took 2 buses in, took the day off of work, and she said, well, can you do a couple extra cavities on me? So I said, sure, and I did them, and I got yelled at because we're only supposed to do 1 tooth at a time, because that's how they're able to generate revenue. And it has, what they were finding was that they were having families come back for fluoride treatments. So those fluoride treatments, if they went to a private sector, it would be $20 for the fluoride treatment. Instead, they're getting, our tax dollars are paying for, $270 to $330, depending on what was negotiated. One of the other things that I found after looking at some of the I-9s is that some of these people who were managing these community health clinics are making like $600,000 a year. And I say if these are organizations who are going to come and get tax dollars, that what I would like to do is I would like to look at every single one of those and say, is those tax dollars being used to the best of its ability? And is it possible if we just paid somebody in the private sector $230 or $270 versus the $20 for the fluoride treatments. And one of the things that I would like to do is look at every single one of those and say, hey, what is the goal of this program? Are we achieving it? And how much money does it cost per person to achieve that goal? And also, let's look at the I-9s. How much are these people making for these nonprofit organizations? And I'm sorry, but if you're making $500,000 a year, that the first thing I'm gonna say to them is, hey, I know how to save $500,000. Just, you know, we need to reduce your income to what some of the other people are making. And I think that's how I would prioritize, you know, what to cut, is basically based off of the efficiency that they have.
And you're pointing towards we're talking about Apple Health System in particular is what you're getting
Well,
at.
there's multiple other organizations that come through, not just for the healthcare system, but also there's other homeless programs, stuff like that, to where some of them are very efficient, and I think that those should have continued funding. And other ones, you know, I personally believe that if they're making that much money, that they shouldn't.
What about the idea of reforming how the tax structure works in this state?
I agree with reforming. I think it needs to be simplified. I'm a small business owner myself, and I have a doctorate. I think it's actually very complicated. I think what we need to do is streamline it. I'm all for, you know, reducing taxes and everything else. Unfortunately, we have a situation to where, you know, we have to get as much revenue as possible for the McCleary decision and also for other things. So at this particular time, I would not propose to reduce any taxes. I say let's keep what we have, and and get the revenue in from that, and then.
What do you mean by simplify?
Have you ever had to file a small business? Go to the Department of Revenue's website, and it's actually quite complicated. I want to make it so, especially for people who do businesses for sales, if you do business in
You're not
all
talking about a
sorts-
structural change, you're just talking about.
Right, no,
process.
it needs to be easy. It needs to be a lot easier. I think that we need to make it easier for business owners to be able to keep track of the sales tax and be able to pay that and have it not so cumbersome.
Okay, now we'll just follow up on education then. Outside of the money, what do you do in the legislature this year to directly start affecting student success, making our schools work better? Because this is something
Right.
legislation can do.
And by the way, you don't cut your way with little efficiencies out of this problem. We could shut down the entire university system and all 34 community colleges, all 6 universities, shut down all of our prisons and not have enough money to fund the education system. So here's specifically what I'm proposing in the K-12 thing. I've been talking about this for weeks. The legislature has imposed on our schools, without providing any resources to do that, a whole new series of reforms and requirements. This TPEP, the Teacher Principal Evaluation Program, good idea, everybody agrees that we should do that, but neither the teachers nor the principals are ready yet to fully apply that. It's burning a lot of time. I'm one of the ones who insisted that we refuse to go along with the feds in making that even more onerous. The new Common Core system, again, a nice idea that we would set standards that the states themselves agreed on what the standards were, but Common Core is not ready to go. The textbooks are not there. There were nice stickers on the covers of the textbook that say they're Common Core compatible, but the teachers will tell you that they are not. And the testing system that goes with them is something called Smarter Balanced. We're one of the consortium members building this Smarter Balanced new test. That I've been in the classrooms while our schools did the piloting of that in May. It is way not ready to go. We've got in South Kitsap school buildings that don't have enough electrons in the building to even turn the computers on, let alone use the equipment. So that Smarter Balance is not ready to go. So what I'm proposing is that we give the schools a breather. That those teachers are quite capable of teaching well if we would get off their backs all of these non-teaching effectiveness reforms, all good ideas, but not ready to go and not resourced. And simply give them a breather of a few years while we fill the classroom with the teachers they need, teacher pay they need, the transportation money, the supplies money. We pay the paralegals, the paraeducators. We've got to do all those things first.
Do pushing these things off have, is there a negative drawback from like the federal government? Do you lose anything? Or you're putting that at risk?
We've basically thrown the T into the harbor with we've declared
losing the
independence.
waiver already.
Yeah.
So
Now, I've talked with the lawyers. The AG has ruled that even though No Child Left Behind, the federal owner's requirement, has not been renewed, that it still applies. And our position is we've got to back away from it.
So you're saying that since legislature already made the first decision,
Yeah.
lost the waiver, lost that money that went with
Right.
it, why not follow through on these other things?
Correct.
Don't put them in yet.
Right.
We're past that.
We already did that with Core 24. We gave the schools an extra 2 years to think it through and decide when they would go all the way to Core 24. That's moving from 20 to 24 credits to graduate from high
Is
school.
there any pressure? Who pushes back on this one in the state?
Gates Foundation, even in my own Democratic Party, there is a little civil war of the pure requirements people and those of us who call ourselves the practical group. And so we've been at swords points on that too. So there are people, the discipline is all, accountability is important.
Michelle, what are your thoughts? Getting away from the just funding aspect, but as a legislator, what do you want to see as far as how the schools are run?
So
What are we doing right, what are we doing wrong?
Yeah, well, I mean, and I have sat down with teachers, and basically they said something similar to what Mr. Seaquist said, was that, that they feel that there's so many rules and regulations that it makes it much more difficult for them to teach. And that's one of the things I would like to do, is maybe give them a little bit more time to comply with everything and figure out what we can do on our end to make their lives a little bit easier. So.
Do you want to ask?
Oh, yes, I do.
He likes to ask education.
We've talked about all the, the education, the K through 12 funding, and you both come up with some ideas on it. I'm a taxpayer. Where I see it at is the levy. Every 4 years, South Kitsap comes out, we need millions and millions of more dollars. It's averaged $5 million a year increase the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
The legislature, and not doing what they're paid to do, managed over the last 10 years to take that amount of levy money that the school districts have in their budget and take it up to 28%. That's a big chunk. That's over 25% of a school's budget that the legislature says, okay, you can go for levy money. Do you see changing that? And then if you do, how is the state going to make up that difference? It is no longer coming up off the backs of the taxpayers for levy. As a state responsibility, you should be funding it, and the levy money going back towards what it was originally scheduled, what it should originally do for some special things in it. How do you see that? What would you do about it?
So the Ross Hunter answer to that is that you would do this levy swap, which is extremely complicated. It's not sure whether our districts here benefit. And the way I judge that is to take the plan and I take it down to our 3 superintendents and their boards. And I say, does this work for you or not? And we haven't seen the current plan. But clearly, the basic idea you're pointing to, which is that the state has got to provide the funding to substantially operate the schools, and the only purpose of a levy, this is in the court decision, the only purpose of a levy is to provide local enhancements that that school, that district, and its voters want to pay for. And the problem is now, we have basically been forcing the districts to pay their teachers, to build their buildings, to do everything right as levies.
So it's interesting that you've said that it's happened pretty much over the last decade. And I have to say, okay, well, who's been there over the last decade? And then during that time, we've been sued by our state. And I definitely think that what we need to do is we need to go back and look at, okay, well, what are some of the other promises that us taxpayers have been made? You know, for example, with the lottery money, we were promised that the lottery money would be going to schools, and instead it didn't. And I say that we need to be responsible for schools, and we need to make sure that we're not continually going back and asking for levy funding and making it look as though if you vote against the levy because you're so, we're already overtaxed, that somehow you hate schools, because that should never correlate. We should be taking care of our schools first and not having to continually rely on the citizens to pass these levies to fund the schools. I don't think it's fair to the schools, and I think there's a reason why we got sued, and I think that we need new leadership.
The lottery money does indeed go to the schools. It had been moved around by the legislature in years past. The lottery folks have a very detailed accounting. As I recall, about 80% of the total receipts go into, the winnings. They run a very tight ship for their own overhead, and something like $15 million a year comes out of the lottery back into the school systems.
We're kind of getting close to the end, but both of you, when we began, we can get off of these two main topics, but I'm okay with that. Those are the important ones. Both of you had a unique perspective, and I'd like just to give you kind of an open chance to explain in a little more detail for us. You were saying your background as a dentist gives you a certain look on kind of those sorts of issues. So maybe tell us, if you're there next January in Olympia, what are the bills that you run that are specific to your experience professionally that you think make the place better? And then Larry was kind of talking about getting people involved, and so whatever your idea would be there. Well, Michelle,
So I'm sorry,
Oh, when you gave your introduction, part of your background as a candidate is your professional experience as a dentist. What does that do when you're down there, when you start thinking about bills you actually want to file that have to do with what you know best? What would you do?
One of the things that I'm very passionate about is making it so our Medicaid system works. Okay, I used to take Medicaid up until 2010 when the state stopped doing Medicaid, and then when it got reinstated, I helped advocate for that. When it got reinstated, I was very frustrated because it didn't. The way that the system is that the infrastructure wasn't there, and I knew what was going to happen, and I had advocated for there to be a teaching piece to it. I advocated for there to be less administration in terms of for people to be able to collect it. And unfortunately what happened was that there was a line item that was added. There was no thoughtful program in place. After 2010, when all the dentists quit taking Medicaid because it stopped, then there's very few dentists who take Medicaid. Okay, and so then what the state did was they went ahead and they passed out letters to all the people who were on Medicaid and said, congratulations, as of January 1st, you're going to get all these benefits. And I said, well, wait a second here, because there's no dentists who will take them because you've jumped ship. And on top of that, for me, in order to collect for Medicaid, I did the math, and it cost me more money to pay somebody to collect for Medicaid. So what I had decided to do instead is just donate certain services to people. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of dentists have done. And so you say, okay, well, there's a targeted group of people who are in nursing homes who are on Medicaid, and there's certain procedures that I'll donate for them. And same thing with other private practice dentists. But the problem is that now you've promised all these benefits to people, and they have a number that they can call. So I call the number and I say, okay, well, I would love to find out where I can go to get dental care. So then they say you can go to this community health clinic. Well, community health clinics have said that they don't have enough staff in order to even take care of those problems. And what I would like to do is I would like to, put a halt on some of the things with Medicaid until we can improve the infrastructure. And I have a team of people who are willing to work together and have a task force and say, hey, what is it we can do? I think there needs to be a teaching component to it. It needs to be something that, there's also a pre-authorization process that is an absolute joke. So you say we tell people we do dentures, but the reality of it is it's very cumbersome. There's, to do this whole pre-authorization process. And I basically want to sit down with a group of people and make it so that it's something that's effective and it works. And I really believe that we have certain segments of our population that we need to take care of. And we're not taking care of them. And there's money that's allocated to go there. There's funding that's available. And I don't think that either A, that those tax dollars are being used properly, and B, that the money's getting to where it needs to go. I think I can really help out with that.
Larry, how are you going to get people more engaged?
So let me take you to this will sound like inside baseball. I think it's actually a very important public policy problem. We have an unusually well-structured state government. If you look at the Constitution, you look at the ground rules, the formal procedures of the legislature and its structure, it's unusually well-designed. And it normally functions on a kind of adults bipartisan basis very well. In recent years, however, we have begun to have a serious infection of the DC partisan politics beginning to take over, and we're getting party line backroom politics, especially in budgets. So one of the things I think is extremely important coming out of this election is that we go into the next session insisting that the way we handle these big money decisions, the McCleary money, the higher ed money, the transportation money, we haven't talked about the mental health money, we've got this long stack of things to tackle here, that has to be done with a different budget building process in Olympia. And in order to get there, you're going to have the voters here convinced that they can see what's happening, that they've got a stake. Right now, the nasty politics has taken us to the place where the voters are simply turned off. I'm out there talking to them every day trying to say, you need to vote. You need to participate in this whole process. So I think at the heart of our problems right now is that the legislature has become constipated, or whatever you would want to call it, with extreme politics.
What have you tried to do during your time there?
Well, first of all, the things I do, and successfully, is I run the higher ed committee on a completely bipartisan basis, as everyone will tell you. We do bipartisan work. Every place that I work, it's legitimate to have Republicans and Democrats. It's good to do that. But at some point, you've got to figure out what the two sides are and how you're going to solve the problems together. So I've got a long record of being able to do that. And on transportation, these other hard issues, you simply get the folks together. That's why I stopped by to see Curtis King in Yakima a week ago, to go talk to the Senate Republican about where we're going. We've got a history of being able to do that, which has been interfered with by cheap politics recently. And I'll tell you, I'm frankly worried that the swing 26th, this is a swing district, it's one of intense politics. It needs to be a district of local politics, candidates talking to voters. If we start seeing the outside folks coming back here again, like they did with Slicker Angel, they're just going to turn off, because the outside money does not come to be intelligent, it does not come to be nice, it comes to be nasty. And the voters are going to say, hell with you all.
Do you think we can reform state PDC rules?
The PDCs, no, I think, you could go talk about how'd you like to do, federal finance reform. No, this is more practice than rules, in my view.
We are right about the end of our time, but we always give you a minute to say goodbye and mention anything that you didn't get to mention. It's kind of your last chance. So we'll let Larry go and then conclude the discussion.
Well, notice the things we haven't talked about is environment, which is very important to us. I'm very concerned about ocean acidification. I sit on the governor's commission on ocean acidification, Marine Resources Advisory Commission. I've chartered, yesterday I was in Olympia with a group of about 30 researchers who are working on shellfish aquaculture. Shellfish is a very important industry of ours, and it's at risk because of acidification. We're trying to figure out with a project that I sponsored What is the carrying capacity of the sound in light of the sound evolving and the shellfish industry evolving? So that's one other thing that I would mention. And thank you very much for taking us in. And I do appreciate Dr. Caldier running. It's good to, in this district, it's good to have someone jump into these kinds of issues.
Michelle?
So, you know, I appreciate you as well. I really do. I admire anybody who runs for office as well as any man or woman who served our country as long as you have. I really do. And I jumped into this race not even knowing Mr. Seaquist. I jumped into it because I want to make a difference. And I got inspired when I went down to Olympia. And, you know, for decades, we have had just one party control, you know, both the House, the Senate, and also as a governor. And I think we can see what's happened over the course of the years. One of the interesting things is now with the Senate Majority Coalition, where we've had both Democrats and Republicans who came together and said, listen, you know, the way that our state's going, it's not gonna shape up well. We're gonna lose Boeing, we're gonna have all these other problems, and they came together. And the really cool thing is they were able to get a budget and make it so that higher education didn't go up. You know, and that's only happened over the last 2 years, and that's with Republicans and Democrats working together. The reality of it is that in Olympia, they haven't had to work with anybody because they've had the majority. And one of my greatest skills is being able to work with people from multiple backgrounds, from different perspectives, and coming together and saying collaboratively, what are the problems, what is it we can do in order to fix them? And I think that's what I can bring to the table. I mean, I'm willing to work with anybody as long as we have a common goal. And so, you know, I respect you, Mr. Seaquist, and I'm hoping I can serve as well. So.
All right. Thank you both for coming.
Thanks
Appreciate
very
your
much,
time.
sir.